Hey everyone, I just wanted to give a quick rundown of how Battle RNG manipulation works in Gen 4 Pokemon speedrunning. So when I say Gen 4, I'm talking about Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Platinum. This does not work in Diamond and Pearl. But so the general gist of it is every time you start a battle, the game generates an RNG seed, so an initial RNG value, specific for that battle. It has no direct correlation or relevance to anything else in the game except for that one exact battle. And then once the battle starts, that RNG value will control everything within the battle. So things like, whether a move hits or how much damage it does, etc. And it will only advance when those calculations are called upon. So if you're having a look at this now, it'll show, there's a current RNG value and it's just not moving at all. But once I start actually using attacks, it'll advance for, does that move hit? How much damage does it do? Does it critical? Etc, etc, etc. And so that means if you can control that initial RNG value, the RNG seed, you can control exactly what's going on in the battle. So I'm just going to type over here on my notepad to give a better example of how that RNG seed is actually calculated and how it works. And yes, my text is a light pink in Notepad on my computer. So the RNG seed is a 32-bit value. And so to easily explain, or more easily explain how it works, I'm just going to break it up into parts. So we're going to refer to the parts as XX, YY, and ZZ, ZZ. Or for those of you who know how to speak Australian, ZZ, ZZ. So XX refers to the day times the month plus the minutes plus the seconds. And so this is in correlation to the clock on the DS, or I guess if you're playing on an emulator, it can be the clock on your computer or whatever. But so, for example, if you were playing on January 1st, and we're going to make the year 2096. We'll just put all of this information in now. And you started at 12:01:43. Whoop. XX would be calculated by, the month is January, so that's 1 times 1, because it's January 1st, plus the minutes, so we had 1 minute, plus 43 seconds, right? So that's 43 plus 1 plus 1, so that equals 45, right? And so because we're going to be writing this value in hex, if we convert that to hex, that would equal 2D. And so I'll write this up here as well. So the upper part of this seed would be 2D if we're starting the battle at exactly that time. And so YY is much more simple than that. It just equals the hour. And so from what I've said here, I've said it was at 12:01, so the hour is 12. So 12 in hex is OC. So that would then be YY in the seed. And then ZZZZ equals the frame count of the game. So that's how many frames the game has counted since you started the game, plus the last 2 digits of the year. So, oh, I did not spell year correctly there. If 579 frames have passed since you've started the game, since I said I was starting at 2096, I would add 96 to that. And so that would equal 675. And 675 in hex equals O2A3. O2A3. And so I haven't chosen that seed by coincidence. That's actually an exact battle seed that I've hit in one of my speedruns that I'm going to use as an example. So if you can control all of these factors, you can control the RNG seed, and then you can control what happens in the battle. And so the example that I would give for that is in Heart Gold any %. That's the exact seed that I hit against Red in my current record of that game. And so if I boot up synonymously the Red fight on an emulator and I inject that seed, so I've put that down here on emulator, put that seed in. If I do the exact motions that happen in that run, the exact same thing will happen. So I use an X defend, Pikachu will pick Volt Tackle and it'll hit me to 65 health. Then I'll use an X speed. Pikachu will pick Iron Tail and it will miss. Then I pick Flash, misses again. Pick Flash, misses again. And then boot up all of these X items, miss, etc. And this is just the absolute perfect, amazing seed that you can get for red. And so I don't have to play through this fight. Hopefully you get the idea that it's like, once you've got the seed, the exact same thing will happen every single time as long as you make the same action. And so the other thing you might be thinking of when you're looking at that is, well, can't you just manipulate every single fight in the game? And the answer is no, you really, really can't. It doesn't quite work like that because there are really specific conditions that need to be met for this to actually be possible. And so the main thing is if you go to this frame count here, right? The frame count is really, really hard to control because the game doesn't count every single frame in the game. Roughly 1 in 10 frames aren't counted. And the problem is that I'm saying the word roughly because it's not exact. And so we commonly refer to the frames that aren't counted by the game as lag frames, and they're just really, really variable. So even if you start the game at exactly the same time, like in real time, and then you start the battle at exactly the same time in real time, so the amount of time between those two things is exactly the same, you will see variance in the frame count within the game, whether it be mashing through different amounts of text, creating different amounts of lag based on how fast you've done it, or, you know, throughout the run, once you start getting different RNG in the battles, you know, how many turns you have to use in a battle, whether you're healing or not during a battle, all the different variants in that way ends up creating more and more variance throughout the run. But even on the very first run, there is still a bit of variance on how many frames have actually passed in the game, even if you're spending the same amount of seconds and minutes before you actually get to that point. So realistically, the only battles that you can use true RNG manipulation on is the first battle since you've booted up the game. Since all of these start since you've booted up the game. Oh, well, the frame count starts since you've booted up the game. The seconds and the minutes and whatever are just reliant on the DS clock. So that's as soon as you start the clock, obviously, is going to be impacting that and what time you set the clock to. So the fights that this is used on in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and in Platinum are Rival 1. You can try and RNG manipulate. And even on Rival 1, especially in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, you'll see so much variance because it still takes about 8 minutes to get up to this fight. It's not as soon as you start the game. And so there's a lot of text that you have to mash through to get to that point. So I've seen variants of between 50 and 100 in the frame count, even if I'm starting the fight at exactly the same time. In Platinum, there's not quite as much variance. It's a bit earlier and there's not as much text. And, you know, the Cherry Grove tutorial is, we suspect, creating a lot more variance than anything in Platinum. But in Platinum, crits are disabled in the first rival fight, so you don't get as much usage out of it. It's more just hoping, or not hoping, but trying to create, or trying to hit battle seeds where the rival isn't picking Withdraw or Growl as much. But so the other instances where this is used throughout the run, you would actually have to save and quit before the fight. And if you've played Gen 4 or you've watched Gen 4, you would know saving and quitting takes a long, long, long time. And so it ends up not being very useful at all. I can bring back up the run from before to give you an idea of how long saving actually takes. We start from there. But so it is used in the glitched runs of Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and in Platinum. So in Platinum, it's used because you save and quit before trying to catch a high-level Tentacruel. And so it's used to try and manipulate catching that Tentacruel because that's also determined by the Battle RNG. And in Heart Gold Soul Silver Glitched, it's used before blue because you save before blue's gym to get into the gym. It's part of the glitch to get into the gym early. You can do it without saving, but because it's also helpful for RNG manip, it's better just to save. And then it's used against red, which you just saw how long that save and quit took before you actually start the fight. And so the reason it's only used in this fight, in terms of saving and quitting before the fight, is because it just takes so long that the only reason you would do it is if the difference between RNG manipulating the fight and getting a really good outcome and not RNG manipulating the fight, the difference between those two is so big that doing the save and quit is less time than that variance. And the only thing that meets that criteria in a speedrun is doing the red fight in the glitched run. And specifically in the glitched run and not the glitchless run. So the reason that's the case is when you're doing glitchless, Raikou has both Choice Specs and Thunderbolt. And so with Choice Specs and Thunderbolt, that is your biggest damage output, is to have Raikou hold the Choice Specs and use Thunderbolt. And so in that case, you're just using Thunderbolt. You are using X items as well to boost Raikou's power and its defense as well. But the only thing that, because the only thing that you're using is Thunderbolt, you're not actually able to really modify the fight very much. So even if you hit a specific RNG seed and you can go, okay, well, this will give me these results. It's not like in the glitched run here where you've seen, you know, I'm using Flash to try and reduce Pikachu's accuracy to get it to miss a bunch so I never have to heal. And then I'm switching between using Thunder, which obviously without Manip, I don't know whether that's going to hit or not. But if I have Manip the fight, I know exactly when it's going to hit and when it isn't. And then Shadow Ball to be able to do different amounts of damage to different pokes. And also Rock Climb is used in some of the Manip fights to confuse his Pokemon and then have them hit themselves in confusion. And so you just get a lot more mileage out of it because of the specific setup in the glitched run. It's actually got nothing to do with doing a glitch per se on red exactly, but because you've got a lower level Raikou without Choice Specs with Thunder, it's worth it to teach Flash and then do RNG manipulation because you end up being able to create really, really fast fights. But if you did that on glitchless, you would lose more time on average just doing the save and quit. If you did it correctly, you would be able to predict if you were going to die at any given stage and then not do it, or not lead yourself into the path that's going to take you to death. So it would be slightly safer, but it would be slower on average and take a lot of work, because doing this and setting this up actually does take a lot of work. Because the other thing you might be asking is, how do you find what the best results are? Like, how do you know what RNG seed is going to give you really, really good results? And that would be a good question. So when you're looking at the Rival 1 fights, you kind of know exactly how much time is going to pass and what that is going to look like for what the minutes and the seconds are. So if it takes 8 minutes and 1 second and you're starting the game at 10:08, then the time is going to look like 10:16:01. And then you can kind of just deduce, okay, well, so this is the earliest that I can start the Rival 1 fight, and then just look at every single RNG seed around that area until you find the ones that are really, really good, and then aim for that one. For red, though, it's quite a bit different, because while you can, and you do, say, okay, I'm going to save and quit right in front of red, how long will it take before I can start the fight? And so it's like, well, it can take about 10 seconds. It's going to take, about 550 frames if you just start straight away. But the seconds and the minutes could actually be basically anything, because you're not always going to get to the red fight at the same time, because it's an hour and 50 minutes into the run, and there's enough variance in the run that it's like, well, it could be an hour and 50 minutes, it could be an hour and 50 minutes and 30 seconds, it could be an hour and 50 minutes and 40 seconds. I don't actually know how many seconds how many minutes are going to transpire before I actually get to that point in the run. But not only that, you could delay buy a second until you actually restart the game, so that if the next second ended up giving you better results by, you know, an average of more than a second, obviously, it would be worth doing that. And so different parts of the RNG seed actually impact different parts of the fight. So the upper 8, so XX, this part, actually has no impact on, for example, whether a move is going to critical. And so that's because the crit chance is exactly 1 in 16. And so the way the RNG advances, if the back part of the seed ends up being the same, when you divide it by 16, you're going to end up getting the same results over and over and over again. Like it's either going to be a critical, it's going to land on 0 and the next move will hit, or it isn't. So the way that we determine trying to find the best red seed starts with, okay, we know it's going to be around the, you know, 550, 600 frame mark. And so we look at the possible chance of getting criticaled on the first 2 turns. And so if anything around there is, well, I'm going to get criticaled and then I'm going to die, we kind of rule that out. So we're looking for the largest possible cluster where you can't get criticaled and die, and then determine, okay, well, looking at that cluster, what seconds on average are going to give the best possible fights within that cluster, and then manually map out all of those fights. And it just so happens that one of those clusters that's really good is D2 on this cluster, and that's the best possible one that you can hit. So when we're doing RNG manip as well, while I am trying to hit that exact seed on the 2D cluster, I also have mapped out 2D, OC, O2, A2, and A1, etc., etc. A lot of the different clusters around that seed. Probably, it's like 12 or 13, roughly, that you can get where you're not going to get criticaled in those first 2 turns. And so then the way that the way it works, if you hit a different seed, basically you can figure out which seed you've hit based on how much damage you take on the first turn. So if Pikachu hits you to, say, 60 damage, hits you to 60 health instead of 65 like it did in that run, I would be able to go, okay, well, that's not 2D OC O2 A3, that's actually 2D OC O2 9F. So it's actually 4 frames earlier. And so then do the strategy that is best for that seed instead. Anyway, so this is actually, it's a fairly old technique. We've been doing this in runs since about 2015. I just wanted to make this video now to try and give, I guess, a base understanding to some people who may not know how this works, but also because I wanted to make a video about the newer and more advanced technique, which is battle identification, which I'm going to make that video right now. So anyway, thanks for watching.